Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lauren Abrams, and I'm the program coordinator at the Georgia chapter of Women in Global Health. Women in Global Health is a nonprofit organization built on a global movement that brings together all genders and backgrounds to achieve gender equality in global health leadership. Women in Global Health has over 25,000 supporters and members in over 90 countries and has 23 official chapters with a strong presence in low and middle income countries. Our Georgia chapter aims to provide community building and leadership development in global health across organizations in the Southeast region. In addition, our chapter intends to create opportunities for mentorship and peer-based support across all career phases, with a particular emphasis on supporting diversity in the global health workforce. We are pleased to present today's event focused on the future of global health diplomacy, featuring prominent women leaders from global health organizations across Georgia and beyond. In a moment, I'll hand it over to our moderator, but first, some housekeeping notes. Please feel free to introduce yourselves using the chat feature of the Zoom, and also submit any questions you had using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Mark Miodowski, Principal and Director of Cornerstone, to introduce himself, today's event, and the panelists. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks. It's nice to be with everyone today. And I am working at Cornerstone Government Affairs, where our firm does work in global health space. And we want to get to our three panelists very quickly because they're wonderful women leaders, have really accomplished careers. They know each other. They have a common thread of worked at USAID. And so let me just start by introducing them. Paige Alexander first is at the Carter Center, where she joined as the Chief Executive Officer in June 2020. Paige has a distinguished global development career with over 2 decades of experience spanning governmental and nonprofit sectors. She was a Senate-confirmed leader at the USAID and was a vice president of IREX, an international civil society, democracy, and education nonprofit organization in DC. She was an executive at UCORD, a nonprofit in Brussels and Amsterdam, working to bring market-led solutions to marginalized farmers in Africa. Earlier, Paige Alexander was the associate director at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and a consultant to the CMS Mott Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and Open Society Institute. And the next, Krista Capozzola, is the current Chief Financial Officer at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, where she joined in August 2015 and leads a staff of over 600 people. Prior to that, she was the budget director at USAID and was also the USAID's Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Bureaus of Democracy, Conflict and Humanitarian Assistance, with responsibilities for Sudan, South Sudan, Yemen, and Syria programs. Krista served for 7 years at OMB, the White House Office of Management and Budget, and she was the chief of the International Economic Affairs branch. She also was a Peace Corps volunteer and went to school at Tufts and has a master's in business administration from Yale. Finally, last and not least, Gloria Steele was appointed by President Biden on January 20th to serve as the acting administrator of USAID after serving a distinguished career in the executive service for over 18 years. As everyone I think knows, Samantha Power is now taking over as the administrator of USAID. But Gloria had that distinguished high honor of running the agency for a while. Before retiring from federal service, Gloria was the acting administrator and the senior deputy assistant administrator for the Bureau of Asia. She also served as USAID's mission director for the Philippines, and prior was posted in Manila as the senior deputy assistant administrator for the Bureau of Global Health. She also has experience in the Bureau for Europe and Eurasia. Ms. Steele has a master's degree in agricultural economics from the Kansas State University and a bachelor's degree in business administration from Maryknoll College in the Philippines. Has received multiple awards in her career, including a very prestigious Presidential Meritorious Executive Award. So with that, let me turn to our panelists and go kind of in order of maybe asking Paige first. And we're asking each the same question. People enter the international development field from many different pathways and backgrounds. What led you to pursue a career in international development, and how did your career pathway lead you to where you are today? So Paige, why don't you start us off, and then we'll go to Krista and then to Gloria. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mark. I will be honest, my pathway was a bit non-traditional, although 25 years ago it was quite traditional. I followed a boyfriend who's now the husband and the father of my 3 kids out to Czechoslovakia. It was not something I had actually studied in school as much as I would have, or as most of the people on this call today have done. So that's what got me started. It was a target of opportunity. You can talk about following someone or just taking a target, but the wall had just come down and I went out to Central and Eastern Europe and as one of the few Americans who learned how to speak the language well enough to get along, it opened a lot of doors for me. Don't check me on my check right now. It's actually pathetic, but that really, I would say for me, that was what did it, was following a targeted opportunity.
That's great. Oh, Krista, how about you? How did you get to be the CDC budget director and the USAID budget director and someone at OMB, and quite an accomplished, but you're a budgeteer, so.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I guess that's a core capacity of mine and passion of mine. I think more broadly, getting into international development, I think we all probably share a common passion and curiosity that got us to open that door. But for me, I think what cemented it was my 2 years that I spent in the Senegal River Valley on the Mauritania side, working as an agricultural volunteer. That opened my eyes and created a lot more questions for me about why things were the way they were and how to solve problems about poverty that I wanted to work on. And that's what got me started. And I think what I'll also just say is that it wasn't a straight line in development. And I did follow auxiliary passions or curiosities. I went to Wall Street after Peace Corps. I wanted to learn about capital. I wanted to learn why countries were poor. And that type of diversity in my career has helped me, I think, chart a path that I've been happy in.
That's fantastic. Gloria, you've been around the world yourself. How'd you get started, and how'd you end up being the acting administrator of USAID until recently? That's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you, Mark. I actually wanted to conquer the business world. My undergraduate degree, as you read, was from, I wanted to be a businesswoman. I enrolled in a business school, and during the summer after my junior year, I was invited by one of my professors to join him in the Department of Agriculture of the Philippines. And having worked there in the summer, I came up close and personal to the poorest people in the Philippines. And that sort of struck me. And I thought that could never be. I mean, that shouldn't be. And so I joined the Department of Agriculture after that, was a counterpart to USAID Philippines, and made full circle and joined USAID after I migrated to the United States. And after the USAID Philippines gave me a scholarship, actually, in agricultural economics. And I've stayed in AID since then. That was 1980. Fast forward to 2021, went through different places at AID and became the acting administrator until recently.
Congratulations, that's wonderful. Yeah. So Paige, let me ask you, you've done it all. You've been in government, you've done nonprofits, and you've done academia. So what are the key leadership lessons that you've learned in each of those different spaces?
I think the key leadership is really to trust your instincts. Having been in each of those fields, I knew what I wanted to do, and I quickly learned what I did not want to do. And I think that is something that you have to, sometimes it's a targeted opportunity, that there's a job open and you walk into it, but you really do need to trust your instincts. Is this something that you can spend more awake hours outside of anything working with these colleagues on these issues? And if not, then you're not in the right job, because it's a long work day. I mean, of course, all things post-COVID will be different, but it's important to find a work-life balance. I would say that I was given advice once to make friends, because you'll see the same people on the way up that you see on the way down. And that is very true. I mean, Gloria, Krista, and I have all worked together at AID. Now we're all going to be in Atlanta. Gloria's going to be at CARE, Krista's at CDC, and I'm here. And we were colleagues, we became friends, and now we're actually going to be neighbors. So I think it's an important part of knowing the ecosystem that you're working in. So that's one of those areas that I think is really important as people go into their new profession.
Well, I think that's great advice. And I was just doing a lecture last night for the UCLA School of Public Health, and that's exactly what I tell people as well, is, be nice to everyone on the way up and down. You never know where people are going to land. I'm probably in my third iteration of knowing the same set of people all in different jobs. And that's just, if you stay in a field and an industry, you just like, oh, I'm here now. I can call that person, I get something done. It helps my organization, helps theirs, because you know each other and trust each other. So that's great advice. Paige, one more question for you. What kinds of organizations do you think offer the best opportunities for women now you've been across those different sectors? And how have you seen it change kind of over time? And I think that's something we're gonna come back to, because I think what I'm hearing and having talked to you all a little bit before this call, things are better for women in leadership positions. In some places, women are dominant and as leaders in different organizations. So what's your perspective on it, Paige, given your career trajectory?
Yeah, I had a series of mentors throughout my career. And to be honest, when I was in government, most of them were men, besides Gloria, most of them were men. And it was really an opportunity for me to learn from them. I really also suffered, as I think many women do, from imposter syndrome. How could I have possibly ended up in this job? This is, I don't have the academic background, or I don't have the political credentials, or whatever it takes. And I think that you need to move past that. And the way you move past that, I found, is having mentors. And so I've set up here at the Carter Center, I had set up within my bureau at AID, a mentorship program, because I think part of what you need to offer and what we need to offer is that you're modeling good behavior, and you are a model for people. And if they see that you're able to strike some sort of balance, or that you admit when you don't know something, which is often very hard for many people to do, but I think women actually do that quite well, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't make you seem weak. And so for me, asking for more information, listening, having these conversations has been a big part of leadership, because everyone wants to think that their leader knows more than they do, but if they don't, it at least gives you an opportunity as a leader to learn from those who do, and take that information in and synthesize it and take the 30,000-foot view. So that for me has been an important part of leadership.
That's great. And we do mentoring at our firm too, and it's a formalized program where we take a young person and put them with someone old like me. But if there isn't a formalized mentoring program, do you have advice on how do you, when you get into an organization, do you look for someone as a leader, you watch for a little while, then you kind of say, can we go out and have a coffee? Can you kind of ask someone to be your mentor, do you think?
Absolutely. I think it's a really important, people need to get outside their comfort zone and do that in a respectful way. And it needs to be done in the field. It needs to be done back at the main office. You really need to understand all parts of your organization. And so even if you are an entirely different part of the organization, we work in both global health and in peace. And I think that crossover is really important, because although it might not be a technical crossover, it's a personal crossover and it's organizational crossover, which has me, concerned about the post-pandemic and people doing this in a 3D discussion as opposed to a 2D discussion. But I think those conversations are incredibly important.
Yeah, good. Well, thanks, Paige. Let me move over to Krista. I was going to ask you a question that resonates with me, because I worked on the Hill for a while, and an average day ended around midnight when you go home, and then you go back at 8 in the morning and you don't see kids. And then, that made me leave the Hill actually to go, do something else, because that was just what the job required. So you have a very busy job. You have a big portfolio. We manage 600 people at CDC. How do you manage the challenges of work life and your balance, and what energizes you to kind of push through the tough days, and even when things are difficult? And CDC certainly been through the gauntlet with COVID, for a variety of reasons, but just workload is one that I see all the time, working a lot with CDC, that people just seem like they're working 24-hour shifts and 7 days a week. So how do you do it?
Well, first, embrace the gray hair.
Yeah, right.
It's going to come,
right.
But no, but seriously, I think first and foremost, what energizes me in the tougher times is the mission. Mm-hmm. Right, and the vision. And I think that's maybe why I kept coming back to this type of work in my career, because it's fairly easy and quite a gift to be able to connect with people who inspire to the level that people who are working in development in some form inspire, and who are dealing with obstacles gracefully and relentlessly, much greater than your particular daily struggles. So I think for me personally, the big picture is a big motivator, and that keeps me grounded. I think also, just in the context of a whole career, it's been helpful for me just to accept the fact that it's important to accept the fact that setbacks and obstacles and out falling on your face is just an essential part, right, of your path. And it's really, there's two ways of looking at those moments. You can look at it and feel very disempowered by it. But then it helps me to really think about the other side, which is, that you own your next move, right? In a tough time, you own what you do next. And I think when you look back on a career, the decisions you take, the moves you make when things are hardest, I think are really the most impactful. And they really set the course, whether you double down, whether you just hang it up for a while and really change course. And I've done that. Or, consider different tweaks to how you're approaching a problem. Those decisions are key. So that perspective helps me a lot, has helped me along the way, because there are a lot of bumps.
Right. I think, and just relying on colleagues, relying on a shoulder, talking to people, I think too, just doing a lot of work with hospitals and people working in emergency rooms and ICUs, they have a buddy system that they've had to get them through the kind of mental health crisis that they're living through. So lots of little tricks of the trade, I guess. So I ask you, when I look at the org chart for CDC, you see a lot of female faces, which is great at the leadership level, all down through the centers and divisions and branches. Do you think there's a difference working in governmental versus nonprofit as far as the opportunities for women in leadership and global health, public health?
I think they're similar. I think that if you talk about global health in particular and public health, you tend to see a lot more women in these fields from the beginning. I've certainly noticed it. If I even go back to my Peace Corps days, all of the health volunteers were women, and so 3/4 of the ag volunteers were men. I happen to be an ag volunteer, but you could see that imbalance right from that stage. So I think that generally the populations attract a lot of women and inspire a lot of women in the field. I think that it's important to look at the numbers in terms of leadership to see the work that we have left to do. And that's for women, but also this really speaks to challenges of all diversity that is important in an organization. I mean, just looking at gender, if you look at INGOs and government, and academia, I think the top levels hover at around 30% for women leaders, even though the proportion in the organizations are much higher, particularly in INGOs. So I think that there's still change and a lot more balance and equity and opportunity that we all have to work really hard to support. It's a responsibility that all of us need to embrace.
Right. And we certainly see it, because you talk D&I, diversity and inclusion, and there's a lot of initiatives going now in this country and other countries to really put some focus on that, not just gender, but race, ethnicity, LGBTQ. Do you think that sort of global movement, or certainly U.S. domestic movement, is this reaching global health agencies as well, or are global health kind of a sector unto itself, and they're not really embracing it, or they have their own set of issues? But
I'd love everybody's views on this. I think that, yes, I think that the light bulbs have been going on. I think many doors in terms of the conversation have been opened in very important ways. And that's a huge step. I think that the question is, how are we going to continue to move forward in a meaningful and sustainable way? I feel like we're on a good path. And the momentum is trending in the right directions. Many times, I think turning it into meaningful action is not easy for people to figure out, for organizations to figure out. There's struggles about that, which are good. And so the more we talk about those experiences, I think, and relentlessly examine how we're doing, and the better off we'll be. And again, it's everybody in the organization's responsibility to think about that. It's not just at the top, it has to come from every single person. How do you bring new people into the organization? Who's in a meeting? Who's at an event? All of that matters at every level. So again, it's energizing. I think things are moving and trending correctly.
That's good. I think at our firm, I know we have someone who's working with the White House and looking at foundations and pushing D&I on philanthropic foundations. And that's something that the White House is interested in encouraging. So kind of is a leadership thing, but it's the foundation should be organically doing that anyway, but they're starting with board membership. And then with a board membership, maybe that's a top-down strategy, obviously, to say, okay, now the board looks a little bit different now, and then you start examining the workforce and leadership ladders that you're throwing down for folks. So it's very hopeful that things are changing. Yeah. So Laura, I'll move over to ask you a couple of questions. So if you've lived in international settings, you've worked overseas in many different sectors, places, you think overseas experience is a necessity or requirement for people that want to work in global health, to have worked in countries around the world, to have different experiences? And are there safety concerns for women in particular in certain countries and regions, or how would you kind of advise folks about that?
Thank you for that question. It's always helpful, but there are no over the decades in which I've been working in international development. One of the things I learned is that there are no hard and fast rules in succeeding in global health or any area of international development. I think that it is always helpful. It took me another 30 years before I went and actually lived back overseas to do international development. And I found a lot of things. I learned a lot of things that I did not know working from Washington on short-term visits overseas. So it is important, but one can succeed without having to do that. What is important though, in health or in any other sector, is being mission-oriented. I think Krista talked about that. You have to have a mission, and your mission needs to be about development in order to succeed. You need to have compassion, and you need to understand institutions and capacities are different from the institutions and capacities here. And you need to have the commitment to strengthen institutions and capacities. And so that works whether you're working in agriculture or in global health. It is very important to do that. In terms of safety concerns, I think women are among the most courageous and bravest of all. And so I've never even noticed that has been a constraint for any of the women I've worked with, whether in global health or in any other sector. I worked in the Global Health Bureau of AID for 5 years. And as I mentioned to you earlier, it is dominated by women. And no one has felt constrained about staying in the health sector for whatever constraints or obstacles there are. But everyone is mission-oriented, everyone has compassion, and everyone is committed to improving the capacities and the institutions that we work with overseas.
Yeah, great. And you have such great experience with USAID. Can you share some of the statistics about women in leadership and how it's maybe changed over time? I think you were sharing with us it's predominantly women running USAID or in the workforce.
It's very interesting. Krista was talking about the agriculture sector has been predominantly men, and that's true. As I said earlier, my master's degree is in agricultural economics. So my first job at USAID was working in the agriculture sector. I was the only woman working in the technical area in our office at that time. That is no longer the case. Things have changed today. I was looking at the statistics, on most recent statistics, and this was from last year. AID in general is made up of 45% men and 55% women. And in the health sector, the proportion is even more stark. 70% of the women who work in the population of global health are females, and the rest are males. And so it has changed over time, as Paige and I were saying earlier. My earliest mentors too have been men, but that has been changing. And it's a good change. Krista talked about diversity and equity and inclusion, and that has become that has more recently become a very important factor that has changed the way we decide and decide on issues and convene meetings, etc. I wanted to note that for the first time since I've worked in government, the National Security Council has put together a framework that includes workforce development and the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have never seen that in the past. And so every government agency in the US is supposed to focus on the workforce and as part of our national security agenda, focus on the workforce and foster and promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is a major change. So as I was talking about change over time, I've been working in US government since 1980. This is the first time that I've seen a focus on workforce and on DEI.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And you have your master's degree in agricultural economics. So, and you worked in the agriculture sector where you said it was mostly men. Do you think you had to have that master's degree and an advanced degree to be kind of working in, what was that, a male-dominated field?
Not yes, but the answer, but not because it is male-dominated.
Okay.
As I've talked about earlier, and as I've observed over time, the work that AID does is about capacity building and institution building. And I know that there are things I learned in the master's level that I did not know and did not understand in the undergraduate level. This is actually an issue that one of the issues that we've been debating on at AID. A master's degree is required for foreign service, for the foreign service. And I met with the young professionals at AID to explain that, for the most part, not in all areas, for the most part, it is required because if we're going to train and build capacity, we need to have a greater understanding of where capacities need to be. And we need to have it ourselves if we are to be able to make judgments about whether it's appropriate or not. But it is not required for everything, and it's not because of gender, but I think it's because of efforts to do the institution building work that we do at AID.
That's great. Well, thank you, Gloria. So we're going to take about another 5 minutes of me asking a couple of questions. Then we're going to open it up for the audience to feed us some questions that we'll pose to our panel. So we'll call this kind of a lightning round. So we're going to go to Paige, then Krista, then Gloria. I'll ask you a question, then you can give a minute or so answer. What's the added value of having more women in global health leadership roles?
So I think compromise and listening. I think that is a skill set that women come by naturally. No offense to men, but it's a skill set we come by, and to have somebody who also, the most vulnerable populations are often women. And so as we're looking at this, it's important that we look through that lens, and it's easier to do as a woman, I think.
That's great. Well, I have to interject because I agree with you, and I think I would apply that to the U.S. Congress. I'll say that as a federal registered lobbyist. But we need more women in Congress too, and leadership everywhere. So thanks, Krista. What's your thoughts on that question about the value added of women, especially in global health?
I guess I'll go to the data.
Yeah, right.
Diversity enables better outcomes. It's just a fact.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Gloria, how about you?
I think I totally agree with what Krista and Paige said, but in addition, I want to add patience. I think just by nature, women are more patient, and there is a lot of work to be done, and in many of them, they take time. And in many cases, we don't succeed the first time around. And so just the patience of trying to work out the problem, no matter how much time it takes, I think is what makes women have an advantage of women in the leadership role.
Okay,
in global health.
Great. I'm going to ask the next question. I think, Paige, I can predict your answer, but you already kind of said it. But the question is, what's the most important thing we need to do to improve leadership paths for women in global health settings? And I think you talked about, you started a mentoring program and things.
Yeah,
like that.
and I think we need to model behavior that this is an acceptable path for anybody and everybody. And I think for women in positions of leadership to keep the doors open. I don't think I was as fortunate 25 years ago when I started. It was hard to find a female mentor. It was hard to find somebody that I wanted to model my life after if I wanted a family and a work-life balance. There weren't that many people out there, that many women out there doing it. And so I think now it's incumbent upon us to show that it can be done. And so I would say that's the most important thing we can do, or I can do at this stage at least.
That's great. Yeah, Krista?
I completely agree.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I think this is really, it's just about seizing opportunities to help and empower the people around you, the people that you want to help build in your organization at all opportunities. That's really the key. And that what Paige just said really resonated with me. Didn't have those people in those positions to look to and model my career after. I think that affects people's confidence. So how can we figure out ways to build that confidence? And I think these kinds of events and these types of organizations are really helpful for that.
Fantastic. Gloria, do you agree?
Yes, totally. Nothing much to add. I think Paige said it earlier. We must make it very clear to ourselves as women that there are no obstacles to being leaders. And if that means having more mentors, that's good. But I think we should raise our children, both men and girls and boys, thinking they can do whatever they want to be. And in terms of leadership in the global health, that would be one of the things we need to make sure our children understand. It goes from the very beginning. You can be whatever you want to be.
This is great. So now we're going to start taking some questions from the audience. And I'm looking at the first one. I want to tweak it a little bit. But what advice would you offer the current global health students who are looking for strategies and opportunities to lead them on a path of a future in global health diplomacy? So which panelist wants to jump at that one? But do you have to have a master's degree? Do you have to go to become a Peace Corps volunteer? How do you get that first internship? How do you start? Where do you go if this is where you want to get going? And everyone has a little different career path here, but you all ended up in a leadership role. But anyone want to take that one on?
I'll just say, I think that the path to the future in global health diplomacy is slightly different than a very technical path. I mean, here at the Carter Center, we work on neglected tropical diseases. And so people who understand guinea worm and schistosomiasis and trachoma are technical people who understand how to get from point A to point B. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have the diplomacy techniques they do within the community volunteer context in a village, but not at a policy level. So you sort of have to decide where you want to be. Do you want to be an on-the-ground person? I would say all of us have had on-the-ground experience, and that whetted my appetite. That's why I ended up in this field. And so I think it's really important, and I'm sure the resumes that we look at now, Return Peace Corps volunteer, pretty high up on the list of someone who is going to be adaptable and flexible in many areas. But somebody who's had an internship at the State Department is also going to understand the politics of some of the decisions made. So it depends what job you're going into and what job you're looking at. But in field experience, frontline worker experience, I think those are all really important. I would say having children now, or grown adult children or young adults who have volunteered at COVID testing, at vaccine, that is actually very practical experience. And it's something that they wouldn't have had while they were doing Zoom University, or if they had been fully in university settings for school, they wouldn't have had the ability during this past challenging time to have that practical experience. They have been overseas, but they now have it in their backyard and domestically. And I think there's a balance to that as well. The global pandemic, if it taught us anything, it taught us that a pandemic can be global, and that it's a great equalizer in the case of everybody from Western developing countries to less developed countries were shut and at home. And that is a great equalizer. So taking advantage of those challenges and finding opportunities really will set you on a good path.
Great. And something you said, Paige, triggered a question, which was, they'd love you to speak more about your concerns of a post-pandemic move from 2D to 3D interactions. I thought that was a fascinating statement you made.
Yeah, well, here at the Carter Center, we have a return to office group that is meeting because I want it to be employee driven. But at the end of the day, I do feel that with 25 years experience working and knowing that I have moved in my career because of the people like Gloria and Krista that I have met, that opportunity doesn't exist as much when you're in a 2D setting. And so I think the brain power and the networking and the collegiality that comes with being in person cannot be overlooked. I think all of us are also doing this all day long, and I probably have twice as many meetings and more effective in many respects because I can meet with more people in a 2D setting, but I'm really missing that interaction and that ability to think and brainstorm together and just have that relationship with people. And I worry that that will get lost. I definitely do not think we need to swing back to a 5-day, in-person work week, but we do have to find a way to have a balance. And that means real interactions and going back to that at some less than 5 days a week in person is what we're going to be looking at.
That's great. This is all triggering thoughts for people. So I'm going to swing over to Krista and Gloria. So for young people starting out and they're trying to do networking and they're young professionals and they want to have these kind of connections and there is no formal leadership program and you are working in a virtual world. Krista, you supervise 600 people. You've got a big empire underneath you. Gloria, you are doing all of AID. So what if someone just kind of starting out as a young professional and you're working virtually and remotely, how do they, crack the door open? How do they start getting on a Zoom call? Do they do Zoom coffees? Do they, how do you have that do you have a water cooler, maybe kind of conversation or a coffee in a cafeteria? Can I get you, we used to do a lot of that. Can I take you out for 10 cent cup of coffee? How do they do that in a virtual world when you're all at your homes and everyone's on a busy schedule and every Zoom call is scheduled back to back from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night? It's tough. I think it's tough for young professionals, but I don't know. Krista, do you want to start that one off? Yeah.
Sure, I'll start it off. I mean, first I'll say I don't want to generalize, but
yeah,
I think it is easier for younger people to network in a virtual world than it is for Paige and Gloria and I.
Yeah.
I think we did it in a different way, in a lower tech way. I think you need both, as Paige is saying. And so how do you work around the constraints of not being and not bumping into each other? I do really miss that. And I know, in the last 15 months, we've had, hundreds of people start working in our organization. Paige and Gloria, for example, new jobs.
Right.
That's a very different way to come in and get to know an organization. So I think you do have to create that one-on-one opportunity, whether it's the chat, the private chat. Hey, let's talk offline after this, or, I've been trying to do that. I did it here today. I think using that private chat, setting up those side meetings, and because you can't run into people, that's important. Can't emphasize the importance of building those networks, building those diverse networks, and supporting each other in those early stages of your career with advice and lessons learned and opportunities.
Right. I can't imagine having hundreds of people hired. When at our firm, we have 100 people and we've hired about a dozen this year. And we're, the leaders of the firm, we're trying to, have these little sidebars. Can we just have a conversation? Like, are you married? Do you have kids? What do you like to do? If you golf, you fish,
Right.
are you a photographer? We do trivia nights just so we can have those, kind of force the interactions where we'll assign people to teams we know they don't work together because they're not in the same kind of silos at the firm. But Gloria, do you have any? I think I agree with you. It's probably easier for younger people because they're like, I just think, I literally had my associate on the call last night for the Schools of Public Health lecture I was giving. And I introduced her, and she's 22 and just coming off 25, just off the hill. And after there's about 15 grad students in the class, and this morning she told me she got DM'd by 15 of them, and they also reached out to her on LinkedIn this morning. It's like, what's DM? I mean, I know it's direct message, but it's like, they just went at it, and then they're out in UCLA in California, but we're here in DC. So I think that younger people maybe find their ways to do that. Gloria, any thoughts?
Yeah, when I started as acting administrator on my first town hall meeting, I made it very clear to everyone that I give priority to meeting one-on-one with them, and that it was okay. And even if we didn't know each other, I encouraged them to come and talk to me, because I know that networking is important, and networking virtually is very difficult. And so I made everyone know, my scheduler and everyone, to know that I am accessible. I do want to meet, and I do want to talk to them. And that takes down one of the obstacles, which is, as Paige was saying, I've been wanting to meet Rachel, Paige's daughter. Can I do it? Is it okay to do it? And I've made it very clear, it's okay to do it. I do want to meet with you. I do want to have one-on-ones with you. And I think that's one of although the younger generation are more adept at technology, breaking into, because it becomes one-on-one. You don't just bump into someone now. And so being able to get that one-on-one meeting is more difficult. And so I think in a leadership position like Paige or Krista, myself, one of the things we can do is to let them know it's okay, we're open to it, because otherwise.
That's great. Well, this notion of mentoring is lighting up our chat. So let me go back to Paige with I think a really good question. What steps have you taken to mentor your global women partners from countries outside of the US? And what are some lessons you have learned through your work in these countries that are very different from the US or similar professional ecosystems? And that's not all, there's more. What is your experience with a two-way open channel to work with our global partners as a key to achieve goals? Diplomacy and strong, trusting relationships. I think it was a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. And as Krista pointed out, Gloria and I are both started new jobs when we haven't been able to jump out to the field and meet people. Part of it for me is communication. I really feel like, even just sending a Eid message last night and a Ramadan message, before, like having that communication and letting people know we're thinking about them, even if we're not there to have that discussion. It's part of the mentoring program right now is just set for the Atlanta office, but it's something that we should do overseas. But again, kind of hard if many of our countries, our 18 field offices, they're not back at the office and they're not all connected, and many of them are just in the field with SMS. So it's hard to take that 2D mentoring role. The other part of the question is, what is your experience with two-way open channels? Again, we don't do program design work without having the field part of it. I think I have been in other organizations where the idea is that you know best from where you're sitting what the funder wants, and therefore you will write a proposal based on what the funder wants, but it's not implementable in the field because the field hasn't been part of that design process. I get the sense from here that even in our innovation hub and all of the different ways we try to have conversations, we do try to make sure that it includes the field, so we're getting the full package of a program. And I think within those opportunities, there's mentoring, there's modeling the right behavior, there's communication, there's, you talked about, Mark, about diversity and inclusion. The equity piece really cannot be understated. I think that that's part of the problem that we have, is that there are a lot of people who are working really hard and a lot of people who are hardly working. And we have to get that equitable balance in there to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be part of something. If they choose not to be part of it, to assess what it is they are doing because they're too busy doing something else. And so I think the equity piece is as important as the diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, that's good. Let me take this one over to Gloria. And it's about going from becoming a technical expert to a leadership. And you, Gloria, you've been, kind of an ag economist, and then you became, an acting administrator of aid. So the question is, can you speak about your journeys going from technical experts to management and leadership roles? I often feel that some organizations have certain paths that are encourage people remaining in those technical roles and not to promote expanding into broader leadership. And I think, I could, Lori, why don't you take a shot at that? And I see Krista, you're nodding. Maybe you can go second.
Yeah, I think in AID it is more possible for you to expand from being technical to being a leader, and no one and nothing will stop you except for your own desire to move on to a leadership role. I knew when I joined AID in 1980, then I wanted to be able to go back and give back. And I thought that the broadest way that I can do that is being in a leadership role. But it wasn't a one step. I mean, I did learn about other sectors. I did learn about many more countries and than the Philippines, which I knew at that time, or than agriculture or economics, which is what I knew at that time. It really is working to get to a leadership role, looking at the looking at the characteristics you need to be there. I guess my point is that in AID, the track to success is the track to the career track is almost always brings you to a leadership role unless you decide to stay at a technical role. And then you map your way up to being a leader depending on what it is you want to lead on. And so I think I leave it at that. I think you need to want to do it and then develop yourself to have the leadership capacity to get to the point where you want. And that's what I did. I wanted to be able to give back. And so I found that I could give back in a broader way if I was in a leadership role. But it was after learning a lot about what AID does in different sectors so that I can lead more broadly.
Yeah. And Krista, I mean, there's actually, just as I think some of the people know who works for the federal government, you all have, there's the senior executive service, there's a leadership track. It actually takes you out of those, like role as a budget analyst and makes you an SESer and trains you for leadership and moves you around. Krista, why don't you we'll not talk about that necessarily, Krista, but just you were nodding along. And how do you kind of address that question?
Sure, I think it's a great question. I think it's a great question for just broadly about advancing in your career. And I'd say two things. One is, don't be shy. Make sure that you are very vocal about what your aspirations are and your interests, not with one person, your boss, with many people across the organization. Talk to people, make sure they know what you're aspiring to. Because many people don't want to go into management, right?
Right.
And a lot of times what we're struggling to find is people who do want to go in and take on those special kinds of responsibilities, because they're not always fun. Okay, right. So that's one thing. And then two, I would also encourage you at all opportunities, volunteer for assignments that are the harder ones, that are the bigger problems, that will allow you to show your skills, your talents in a different area. Mm-hmm. Just look for those opportunities and step up. Wherever you can. And that's the best way to get people to notice that you have other talents.
That's great. And Paige, I see a lot of nodding in agreement. Did you want in on this question?
Well, because I typed this in the answer as well. Yeah. I did not start as a technical expert, and Gloria probably won't remember this conversation in like 1995 that I had with you and Pat Matheson, because I felt like the grass was greener. I needed a technical degree. I needed to go into a specific technical area as opposed to just being a country desk officer or chief of staff. But as Krista said, not everybody wants those jobs. And I would say even being Senate confirmed twice at USAID to run regional bureaus, the most I learned was being head of HR for a 10,000 person agency for 6 months. The life lessons I took away from that really have helped shape all of my leadership skills, because it made me realize every element of, I will never be the technical expert, but I will listen to them and hopefully eventually gain enough knowledge that I can be helpful in seeing the forest through the trees. But as Krista said, not everybody wants to deal with some of those problems. And so making it clear that you are flexible and that you can see different teaming situations that you've been in, and you can address those as a leader, even if it's a technical lead, but as a leader of a group, it helps you decide what you want to do. So I didn't go back to grad school for a specific technical degree because I really enjoy what I'm doing and putting the pieces together. So it's a different skill set.
Yeah, that's good. I started as a presidential management intern under Ronald Reagan in a budget office in the Department of the Interior. And my colleague I went to go to the Hill and then, then came down to a consulting firm. But my colleague who stayed, she became the Fish and Wildlife Service budget director. And then one day they said, how would you also like to be the HR director? And so she became the HR director for, she was there for 30 years before she retired recently. But she spent all of her time on HR and all the complaints and the suits and the EEO stuff you deal with. And she almost kind of regretted it in the end, but she learned a lot. But it was, you're dealing with all the really tough problems of running a big organization. So it's.
But you work it backwards. As with any experience you have, you work it backwards. How did we get here, and what were the steps along the way that could have allowed us not to be in this position? And you learn lessons from that.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've got about 8 minutes left together, and then we have to have a minute for administrative purposes, but we can get back to Lauren. So if each of you can take maybe 2 or 3 minutes, because we've been sending questions at your way, but now you've listened to the discussion, you've seen the chat, maybe we can just do some closing comments from each of you for maybe a couple minutes of filling in the gaps of things that you don't want to leave it on the field. It's like, oh, I wish, after the call's over, I wish I had told them this. So here's your opportunity to close it out. And I'll just maybe, start with Paige again, and then we'll go to Krista and Gloria.
Sure. Well, I do. Thanks for having this and hosting this. I think it's an important conversation to have, and hopefully we've been able to give some insights into how we got to where we are and sort of what we're seeing in the burgeoning sector that we work in. Carrie had asked a question about women who have become caregivers during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I think all of us, any mother can admit that not having a elementary or middle school age child at home has been like a game changer, because if I had that, if my 3 kids if this had been 15 years ago, this job could never have happened. I wouldn't have been able to do it. And so I think, what I would say is every other developed country in the world has, health, has a healthcare system, and it has a childcare system that really allows families to count on it. And we don't have that here. So I think that's an important part of the infrastructure bill. It's part of what is going to be the game-changing space, I hope, in the professional world. So women do not feel that they are the ones staying home. I saw a statistic that 570,000 women have stayed home, gave up their jobs to be caretakers during the pandemic. Getting those women back into the workforce, I think it's also incumbent upon all of us, all 62 people on this call. You have to recognize non-traditional workers, because people are going to go out of the workforce and come back into the workforce. And it's primarily going to be women, and you can't fault them for those choices. And being able to bring people back into the system is going to be important. So probably didn't answer your question entirely, Carrie, but I just didn't want that to go without saying.
Yeah, okay. Well, Krista, any closing thoughts, or pick up a question from the chat that really resonates with you?
Sure. Yeah, I keep looking at the first question in the chat. I think that's a great question. Do you think that male leadership is different from female leadership in global health? I think this is a good way to summarize some of the things we've talked about today, and also bring it back to gender. Because again, I think what we're all saying in different ways is that there really is not one path. Mm-hmm. There are different paths. And everybody has to figure out how to follow that one that's right for them in terms of advancing and growing in their careers. I think that in terms of leadership, women and men, there tend to be characteristics different between the 2 genders. Let's just say that, and maybe that's the understatement of the century. But I think as far as leadership goes, I think there is a diversity of leadership types between men. I've had a huge range of different types of men leaders in my career, and for women too. There isn't one type of woman leader. So I think it's helpful if we get away from men leaders do this, women leaders do this. I think every leader should bring their own personality, has to bring their own authentic self to the job. And so you'll see diversity across the genders in that. And that again speaks to everybody brings their own stuff to the table, and that's what makes it fun and interesting.
That's great. Gloria, what's on your mind as your advice to our audience, who's maybe some of them launching a career and they all aspire to have careers like you in different ways. But what do you tell them?
Yeah, I'd like to leave with 3 thoughts
Okay.
that I had not talked about. The first one is there's nothing better than having a career in international development, whether it be in global health or agriculture or anything. There's nothing better than waking up every day to know that your job is to make the world a better place. And so to all our listeners, you are on the right track. If you're interested in international development, it is a great place to be. Whether you are a technical, you remain a technical person or a leader, it's great. The second is, as you go to development, international development, we must remember that our job is not to do it for them, but rather to develop their capacity to be able, and commitment to be able to do the work that we want them to make themselves and their countries a better place. There's been a lot of talk about the decolonization of development, and I think it's very true. Development must be locally led, and our responsibility is to develop that capacity for them to lead their own development. And then finally, a final thought is, as you start your career, you must know where you want to end. You'll find out that in no time at all, your time is over. You've spent decades, and you will have wasted it if you go in different places. You need to know where you want to be at the end, so you can work backwards and work towards the end. And I think you'll feel much better about yourself if you did that, than to find out that they don't add up to anything because you had not thought about where your career track was going to be. At least that's what worked for me. So let me end there, Mark. Thank you.
That's a great closing thought. That's good. Well, we can't see the audience, so let me be the voice of hundreds of people that are going to see. Some are seeing it now, but others will watch this later. And thank the panelists. You all bring so much to the game and the field, and such great words of advice. It's just been wonderful seeing you all today and enjoying the time we spent. And hopefully people have learned something from this. So maybe I'll kick it back over to Lauren Abrams. I think she wanted to make a couple of announcements. And thank you, Lauren, for having us all today.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you to Mark for moderating the event, and a huge thank you to Paige, Gloria, and Krista for sharing your experiences with us today. The sort of administrative announcements that I had are just to keep your eyes open for our Mentor Match program coming in fall of 2021 and some other events that Women in Global Health Georgia chapter has planned. So you'll be hearing from us if you're on our email list, and also you can follow us on Twitter. Rachel put the Twitter handle in the chat. Thank you again to everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Great.
Thanks so